Before rivers learned where to flow, before hills knew when to rise or rest, the land was quiet and unfinished. Beneath its surface, something ancient stirred, not to rule, not to command, but to shape, to guide, and to teach balance through movement. This is a story inspired by one of the world's oldest creation legends, a story about land formed by sacred forces, about law carried through care, and about how creation continues only when it is respected. This is the Rainbow Serpent, a celestial legend remembered by the land itself. Before the rivers had names, before valleys knew where to rest, the land lay wide and quiet. I was old even then, waiting, listening, unfinished. The sun crossed above me, but water did not yet stay. It came and went as it pleased, leaving only dry memories in my dust. Animals wandered without trails. People walked carefully, as if asking permission from every stone. Everyone searched for something they could not explain, a path. In those days, nothing was wrong. Nothing was complete either. The wind moved freely, rearranging sand and whispering, "Not yet." The hills were small. The flat places were too flat. Waterholes were rare, shy, and hard to find. When someone discovered one, others arrived quickly, trying to look casual about it. The kangaroo pretended it had always known. The emu stared as if it might argue. I watched them all and held my breath. Then I felt it, deep beneath my skin, a stirring, not anger, not hunger, a presence waking, as natural as dawn. Colour moved in the dark like light remembering how to travel. The creatures sensed it too. Birds stopped mid-call. Lizards flattened to warm rock, suddenly unsure whether the rock was still ordinary rock. People paused and listened with their whole bodies. Somewhere below, something ancient turned slowly, as if stretching after a very long sleep. When the first movement came, it did not arrive politely. It arrived like truth. I felt the ground surface tighten, then loosen, then change. A line pressed forward beneath the soil, smooth, powerful, unhurried. Wherever it passed, dust lifted. The silence shifted. The animals followed at a careful distance, trying not to appear curious. That did not work. Curiosity is loud, even when it whispers. The smallest creatures were the bravest. They stepped close enough to feel new dampness. The Rainbow Serpent did not announce herself. She did not explain. She moved, and the earth became more itself. Her path carved gentle curves into the landscape. Low places learned how to hold. High places learned when to rise. Water began to gather, first as a shimmer, then as a promise. The kookaburra laughed once, surprised by its own echo over fresh stone. The dingo blinked at the new stream as if it had misplaced it. I did not laugh. I remembered. The Rainbow Serpent continued her journey, and the earth learned how to move with the serpent. Where she pressed forward, the earth's surface softened. Where she curved, the earth's ground followed. Long channels formed, holding water that no longer hurried away. Rivers began to remember their paths. Some animals followed these lines carefully, others stepped in by accident and pretended they meant to. The wallaby shook one wet foot, surprised. The earth seemed to have felt joy spread, not loudly, but steadily, as water finally learned how to stay. As the serpent passed, hills rose gently, not to block, but to guide. Valleys settled where rest was needed. Waterholes appeared like held breaths finally released. Birds gathered at the edges, tilting their heads at their reflections, unsure whether to greet them. Fish arrived without asking how. People stood quietly, sensing that this was not a moment to interrupt. The earth's ground started to become legible, shaped in ways that could be followed, remembered, and returned to. Not everyone understood immediately. Some drank too much, too fast. Some splashed where stillness was asked for. The Rainbow Serpent did not scold. She did not pause. She simply moved on, and the water responded. Where it was respected, it remained generous. Where it was rushed or taken without care, it thinned, then slipped away. The creatures noticed. They began to learn that staying full required listening. The earth held this lesson gently, letting it sink deeper than words ever could. Paths began to form, not straight, but sensible. The emu learned which way led back to water. The goanna learned when to wait for shade. Children followed the curves with their feet, discovering that the land now answered when they asked questions with patience. Laughter echoed once across a new valley, startled by how far it travelled. The earth seemed to have felt pride then, not in perfection, but in progress. Creation, it seemed the earth understood, was not about getting everything right. It was about learning how to belong. The Rainbow Serpent slowed as her work took hold. Rivers flowed with confidence, hills held their shapes, water rested where it was needed most. The creatures moved differently now, less searching, more remembering. Even the wind seemed to follow the new lines, whispering along riverbanks instead of arguing with them. The earth seemed to have felt balance settling in, not as stillness, but as rhythm. Law had begun, though no one had named it yet. It lived quietly, in how the land answered care with continuity. For a time, the world tested what had been made. Some took more water than they needed. Some wandered where the ground asked them not to linger. Some forgot that new paths were shared paths. The earth did not protest, but responded. Where water was treated carelessly, it thinned. Where banks were trampled, they softened and shifted. No voices warned, no hands corrected. The learning came quietly, through experience. Balance, as the ground was discovering, teaches best when it is allowed to answer for itself. The Rainbow Serpent did not return to explain these changes. She did not need to. Her work lived on in how water behaved, in how the land remembered. The creatures noticed patterns forming. When they paused, the water stayed. When they rushed, it moved on. A young bird complained once, briefly, about having to wait. The river did not argue. It simply flowed where patience had gathered. I held these moments carefully. Law was settling in, not as fear, but as understanding. People began to listen differently. They watched where the water rested longest. They learned which crossings held firm and which asked for care. Children traced lines in wet sand, discovering that some marks lasted and others disappeared. Laughter followed mistakes, not shame. The earth seemed to have felt something important take root then. Respect without resentment. The land was no longer something to conquer or question. It was something to work with. Law, the ground realized, was not restriction. It was relationship. Even the animals adjusted. Kangaroos learned which banks were strong. Snakes rested in shaded places shaped just for them. Birds nested where water reflected sky instead of swallowing it. Not every choice was perfect. Not every lesson was quick. But the land answered consistently, and that consistency became trust. The earth felt itself steadying, no longer shifting without meaning. The Rainbow Serpent's path still glimmered beneath the surface, reminding everything that creation was ongoing, maintained by care, not control. In time, fewer mistakes were made, not because the world was afraid, but because it had learned. Waterholes became meeting places instead of arguments. Paths were shared instead of claimed. When storms came, they passed without erasing everything behind them. The earth rested more easily then, knowing that what had been shaped was now being honored. Law had fully arrived, not carved in stone, but carried in behavior. And the land, once unfinished, had learned how to keep itself whole. The Rainbow Serpent slowed, not because her work was finished, but because it had taken root. Rivers flowed without instruction. Hills held their places without effort. Creatures moved with familiarity now, stepping where the ground felt sure beneath their feet. The earth noticed how often water was approached with patience instead of urgency. The land had learned its own rhythm. Creation, the land understood, was no longer something happening. It was something being practiced, again and again, through care. Animals settled into patterns that made sense. Kangaroos paused before crossing streams, as if remembering when they were not there yesterday. Birds nested where echoes stayed gentle. Fish learned the curves by heart. People followed paths shaped by listening rather than speed. Sometimes someone forgot and hurried ahead. Sometimes they laughed when they had to turn back. The earth felt no need to correct them. The land answered softly now, confident that understanding would return. The Rainbow Serpent rested beneath me, present without pressing. Her movement lived on in water, in colour caught briefly on stone after rain, in the way valleys held stories longer than sound. No one asked where she had gone. No one needed to. Her law remained, not as a rule to be enforced, but as a balance to be kept. The earth felt lighter then, knowing that what had been shaped no longer required watching to endure. Seasons passed, and the land responded with ease. Dry times came, but water remembered where to gather. Storms arrived, but they no longer erased everything behind them. Creatures adjusted, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with grace. The kookaburra still laughed at echoes that surprised it. Children still tested puddles with bare feet. The earth held all of it gently. Balance, as the ground knew now, was not stillness. It was movement that remembered where it belonged. When the Rainbow Serpent finally slept deeply, the world did not fall apart. It continued. Rivers flowed, paths held, waterholes reflected sky without asking permission. The earth felt whole, not finished, but complete enough to carry itself forward. Creation had become continuity, law had become habit. And the land, once waiting, now knew how to answer care with care in return, quietly, steadily, and for as long as attention remained. People began to speak of the land differently, not loudly, not all at once. They pointed instead to a bend in the river, to a valley that held water even in dry times, to a place where storms always seemed to soften. No one claimed ownership. No one argued. They simply remembered. Animals gathered at familiar crossings. Birds returned to the same trees. The earth felt stories forming, not to explain creation, but to acknowledge it. Children noticed the patterns first. They followed rivers. They traced hills with their feet. They asked why water stayed in some places and not others. The answers were never long. "Because it listens," someone said once. The people accepted this. They understood that the land was not a puzzle to solve, but a presence to learn from. The earth felt their attention settle gently, like water finding its level. Stories travelled without being written. They moved through quiet evenings and shared meals, through watching clouds gather and disperse. The rainbow serpent appeared in these stories not as a figure to fear, but as a force to respect. The rainbow serpent was described through winding of the river, through colour after rain, through the way law held without being spoken. The land carried these stories easily. Memory, when treated with care, does not weigh the land down. The land itself remembered. The earth remembered where water had first learned to stay, where hills had agreed to rise, where patience had been rewarded. These memories did not fade. They shaped how the land answered new footsteps. When someone listened, the land responded clearly. When they rushed, it asked them to slow. The earth did not judge. The land reflected. Law, it knew, lived not in punishment, but in the consistency of response. The rainbow serpent rested, not gone, but woven into everything she had shaped. Her movement lived on in riverbeds, in shaded pools, in the quiet agreement between earth and water. The world no longer searched for her. It lived with her instead. The earth felt complete, not finished, but balanced. Creation had become continuity, and the land, once waiting, now knew how to remember itself, through care, through attention, through staying in relationship. Some say the rainbow serpent still moves, not as before, cutting new paths into the ground, but as a quiet memory. When rain follows the old river banks, when rivers remember where to turn, that is her, the rainbow serpent. The earth did not announce her presence. It do not need to. Those who spend time with the land feel it instead, a sense that the land is awake, listening, and ready to respond when approached with care rather than demand. Those who walk slowly notice first. They pause at waterholes. They wait for shade. They listen before stepping forward. The land answers them more clearly then. Paths feel steadier. Distances feel shorter. The earth respond. Creation, the land has learned, continues through attention. When care is given patiently, balance holds without effort. The rainbow serpent taught the land this, not through words, but through movement that invited everything else to learn how to belong. The world does not mark these teachings with monuments. It marks them with continuity. Rivers still flow. Hills still rise and rest. Dry places remain dry when they must. Wet places hold when they are needed. Silence stretches wide, but it is no longer empty. Law lives here, not written, not enforced, but practiced daily through listening, restraint, and respect. The land holds this balance carefully, knowing how easily it could be lost when attention wanders. If you ever feel unsure where to go, remember this. The land is not asking you to hurry. It is asking you to notice, to watch how water moves, to see where others have stepped lightly. Courage here does not rush forward. It pauses. It listens. It stays long enough to understand what is already being offered. The rainbow serpent's gift was not answers, but the conditions that allow them to emerge. And so creation continues, not as an event, but as a partnership between the Rainbow Serpent and the earth. Water remembers, land responds, life adjusts and learns, the earth remain, shaped by sacred movement, held together by care. The Rainbow Serpent rests within the land, present in every flowing stream and river and crossing. This is not an ending, it is an invitation to listen, to respect, to stay in balance with what sustains you. After all, the land remembers how it was shaped and how it must be treated to endure.